Salute BookTube. Welcome to my channel. Thank you for being here. It's been a while. I don't think I posted for almost 2 weeks, maybe 12 days, something like that. But I think you can excuse me. I think I have a reasonable excuse. Um, if you're not living in a cave, you know that we're entering, I think today is day 36 of the Trump Netanyahu homicidal war here in the Middle East. For those of you who are new to my channel, I'm based in the United Arab Emirates, which is the country that has received the most missile and drone attacks of any country in the region, as a response to American and Israeli attacks on Iran. They can't reach America, so they're hitting American assets here where I'm at, and this sort of short um, 2 to 3 day operation that was envisioned by Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump has now lasted 36 days, and it still doesn't look like there's going to be any end in sight, at least not soon, unless more rational minds prevail. But I just wanted to let you all know that I'm okay. I am safe. The attacks continue here. Casualties are rising. They haven't increased. They're not huge numbers. We're still talking low double digits. It just crossed the double digit mark. Although every life is important. What I'm trying to say is it could be much, much worse. What's not worse is that the economy here is devastated. This is a country, the United Arab Emirates. Yes, oil is a big part of the economy, and a lot of that goes through the Straits of Hormuz. And prices have increased. They've increased. I didn't check. I think last I checked, it was hovering around $115 a barrel. There's rationing in Australia. There's rationing in Thailand, in Vietnam. The Philippines went to the Iranian government and made a deal to say, look, please sell us oil or to reduce prices. Prices even here in oil-rich UAE have gone up. I don't want to know what it's like in Europe or North America, but probably the same thing. It's gone up, and that's going to affect food prices, etc. I think Vladimir Putin in Russia is happy because he's a net oil exporter. And there's been talk, pro-Trump people will say Donald Trump is doing this on purpose. He's raising oil prices to hurt China because China imports a lot of oil from places like Iran and the Middle East. And thus high oil prices are hurting China. But there's talk that Iran is selling China discounted oils, so I don't know how relevant that argument is, but you add on top of it this is supposed to be a 2 to 3 day sort of maybe 1 week excursion, just a small little intervention by the American military. The regime will collapse within a couple of days, and everybody can go back to normal. That's not being born. What was supposed to be a localized conflict has global ramifications, and we're seeing that. And the Trump administration, in all their glory, just the demon of their poor diplomacy is coming to hurt them, because Donald Trump, he had been threatening NATO since his first administration and saying America's going to pull out of NATO, and they have been not very tough on Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine. He alienated, just this past week, he alienated the French, he alienated the Spanish, the British. Europe is in a bit of a pickle now because I'm turning this into geopolitical. This is a booktube channel. All I want to say is the French media was following it. There was a French ship that had to cross the Strait of Hormuz, and the French news media was following it. They were tracking the route of the ship, and the ship passed, and the Iranian forces didn't attack it, and it crossed the Strait of Hormuz, and now it's heading to France. And there's talk now. The Iranians made an offer to the Europeans saying, "Look, we'll sell you oil. We have no problems with you, and we'll even sell it to you. We'll sell you, and you can buy the oil in euros. Let's ditch the U.S. dollar." And that has huge ramifications. Huge ramifications. You add to that, Donald Trump, he supposedly an ally in the region, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. He went up on a stage and said he can kiss my rear end. Whatever your views are of the Saudi Arabian government, I'm not the biggest fan of the Saudi Arabian government, but you would think a president at war in the region requires one of the largest economy in the region. You want them on their side. You don't want to be making statements like that. So it's just a ripe old mess, and I don't see any. Your guess is as good as mine. But again, the diplomacy, that whole structure, the New World Order, the Prime Minister of Canada made that statement. Just recently, the Foreign Minister, Lavrov of Russia, made the statement, the New World Order, this pillar of NATO in Europe, America supporting NATO in Europe, the pillar of keeping the oil in the Middle East flowing, and then East Asia, that's a whole other subject. Looks like it's changing and it's cracking, and that's going to have ramifications. It's going to have ramifications. But this diplomatic, just a terrible diplomacy. Every foreign engagement Donald Trump engages in, it's not diplomatic. It's always aggressive. He's always finding faults with any country. He's attacked NATO allies like France and Spain. He's been criticizing Canada for a long time, even Canada, and now with the whole Saudi Arabian thing about kissing rear end, telling the king of Saudi Arabia to kiss his rear end. It might get cheers in America, but it's not. Let's just say American diplomacy, once upon a time was a little bit different. Let's just put it that way. A little bit more diplomatic. And now what's the strategy? Basically, if there's no regime change, Donald Trump said he's going to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age. That's basically that's the strategy. Just bomb them to the Stone Age and then leave, because that's what America does. They bomb, they destroy countries, and then they leave. They did that in Iraq. They did it in Afghanistan. It seems they're going to do it to Iran. And they've done that before. In World War II, they bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki to the Stone Age. But in World War II, that was the greatest generation. The greatest generation. What did they do? The Marshall Plan, they invested in Japan, they invested in Germany. They didn't remove the emperor of Japan. They didn't do regime change. They kept the emperor. There's still an emperor in Japan. So will they remove the Ayatollah from Iran, or will they keep him and support a sort of new Iran? Highly doubtful. Highly doubtful. But they're good at bombing places back to the Stone Age. That's the policy. Anyway. 10 minutes thought clearing about recent events. Again, I apologize for not being very active the last 10 days, let's say. God forbid I don't post every other day a 50-minute video. I didn't think that was part of the rules, but no, it's just an awkward time, and it's reflected in my reading. This is a reading wrap-up video. Another reason why my reading has been affected, and I'm a bit late in doing my March reading wrap-up. I'm behind in my reading what I plan to read in March. because this war really began right at the beginning of March. What I've found myself doing is assuring people, calming people. There's a lot of people who are afraid here in the Emirates because of the missiles. We're hearing loud booms. These are missiles being intercepted. Some missiles are peppering through the cracks and landing and causing chaos. But what I found myself doing a lot is there's a lot of people who are afraid and they want reassurance. So I've been visiting a lot of people, even sleeping over at their house just to reassure them, keep them calm, keep their minds away from just from all the craziness. So that's also affected my reading. I can't take the books with me to friends' houses, and I'm supposed to be assuring them, not telling them to leave me alone while I read. So that's affected my reading as well. But I did finally, although almost 1 week of April is down, I finally finished my March reading, and I wanted to share what I've read, and then maybe I'll make another video for what I plan to read for April. So we begin with what I read in March. The first book, or the first couple of books I want to mention, is related to my personal reading plan of reading about American history and politics and American society in 2026, which is the 250th anniversary of the United States, 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which happens on July 4th. This is 250th anniversary, and America finds itself at war. At its 200th anniversary, which was 1956, America was, they were picking up themselves from the ravages of Vietnam. What was the next milestone? 1926, I guess. What was that? That was, the 20s was World War I, World War II. That's future historians are going to look at that as one big war. So that was a war. Before that, the 100th anniversary was 1876. America was picking itself up from the Civil War. It's just been... Anyway, it just shows you how much America has been, its history. There's so much war. But anyway, I've been reading about American politics and history. The first half of the year, I'm focusing more on American politics and society sort of books. And then for the second half, I'll link it to Historathon, which we'll get to later. But anyways, the first book I read, the first book I want to discuss is by Bruce Cannon Gibney. It's A Generation of Sociopaths. Interesting cover there with a devil dressed as the generation of sociopath is there in the subtitle, How the Baby Boomers Betrayed America. And it's an interesting book. The author, Bruce Cannon Gibney, makes the argument that the baby boomers pretty much destroyed America. It destroyed America from its post-World War II, affluent society, the 1950s, the 1960s, and then there was the affluence continued into the 70s and 80s, but the recent sort of problems America is facing, the issues, not problems, but issues America is facing, really have to do with the baby boomers. He charts the history of the second half of the 20th century with the rise of the baby boomers, the 20th and the early 21st century with the rise of the baby boomers. So in the beginning, America had a high tax regime and strong regulations and a strong labor union and strong government, welfare, etc. But as the boomers started to age and started to take over power and became adults and became in charge, basically, he charts how American policies were all designed to suit the boomers, that huge cohort born between, he uses the dates 1942 or 1944 to 1960, I believe, to term the boomers. There's a big spike. And you can see it. The clearest way to explain it, or what he explains in the book, is, for example, tax policy. So there was high taxes in the 60s and the 70s. And then Ronald Reagan came and he, slashed taxes and he cut regulation. But yes, the American people felt that they were overtaxed and they wanted government out. But Gibney, what he does is he links it to baby boomers, because in the 60s and 70s, baby boomers were still young. They were just coming into the workforce. But by the 1980s, they hit their 40s basically. They became managers, they became C-level executives. They started taking over companies. And we can see that the tax cuts, he argues, are the boomers who said, our retirements are coming up. We need taxes to be slashed. We have second homes. We need taxes to be slashed. We have capital gains because we've been investing for the last 20 years of our working life. We need capital gains taxes to be slashed. Less welfare, more tax cuts, because we're starting to become executives and managers and CEOs, and we want our taxes lower. So that's one example. There are other. He uses a lot of examples of the last 50 years. It was a very interesting book, and I was impressed. I was impressed by certain aspects. There are parts of this that are really good, very well written. It gets in the middle. He starts talking about taxes, and it gets very complicated with the taxes, especially for a non-American. Maybe Americans can relate, but for a non-American, it was a bit tedious. But then at the end of the book, again, it goes back to just bashing the boomers. The use of the word psychopaths and boomers, he must have typed it at least 30,000 times in this book. It's on every sentence: boomer, psychopaths, boomer, psychopaths. There's a lot about the baby boomers as draft dodgers. A lot of baby boomers, especially the wealthy, dodging the draft for Vietnam. But as I discussed, there are some passages that are quite good. I do want to read some, but just to give you some background, there's the author. He's quite young, although this book is a bit older. It's from the 2017, so it's a bit dated now. But Bruce Cannon Gibney is a venture capitalist and writer, an early investor in PayPal. He later joined Founders Fund, where he and his colleagues funded Facebook, Spotify, Palantir Technologies, Elon Musk, SpaceX, Airbnb, Lyft, and other startups. So very much a venture capitalist, San Francisco, Silicon Valley kind of guy. But despite his venture capital background, he's got some literary flourish, some interesting. I don't know how much assistance he got in writing this, but you can tell he's an overall bright guy. I'll give you a good example, a nice quote I found here on page 76. He was talking here, he's going a bit behind. He's making the argument that America needs to invest in science, more science, less religion. And here he was comparing that, the North versus the South during the Civil War era and before and after it. Here's a quote to give you an example of some of his best writing. It says, "People in the North had only to look up to see the benefits of empiricism. Skyscrapers rose, vertical emblems of progress made possible by steel and elevators and made useful by the American inventions of telephones, electric lights, and air conditioning. Public buildings instantiated technical triumph, and the great civic structures of industrial America were not religious institutions, but train stations. Cathedrals where salvation was mediated through speed, prosperity, and change. It was an age of a Penn Station modeled on the baths of Caracalla, rather than the dismal sewers and elevated strip malls of today's Amtrak." So that's pretty deep writing. I was impressed by that. I had marked that passage as something I'd like to share with you guys. Again, if you want another example, here's an example of him talking about the 1970s, that benighted decade. It says, because he has some comedic flourishes, he tries to be funny. It doesn't always work, but he tries. He tries. It says, "One could be forgiven for dismissing the 1970s as a best-forgotten waiting room between the youthful rebellions of the 1960s and the Reaganite glitz of the 1980s. The shag and the stagflation, the fleeting presidencies of the crook, the bumbler, and the peanut farmer, the space station that fell out of the sky above, the mania for Pong down below. It's hard to take the disco decade seriously, but lurking beneath the ephemeral tackiness lay a profound reordering of priorities. A process that was tentative, moderate, and even reasonable at first before it became increasingly sociopathically unhinged, in line with the boomers gaining political power." And he goes on to discuss what the changes that happened in the 70s as the boomers take responsibility. So, again, it's dated. I don't know if I want to recommend this. if you're non-American, I don't know how much it'll still be interesting, but there are chapters when he gets really into the weeds of taxes, and I don't know how exciting that is for a non-American audience or even for people who read for pleasure. But there's just one more thing I wanted to say about the author Bruce Cannon Gibney, because in the beginning, the dedication to his parents, his dad's name's Jeb, which sounds like a very white American name, but his mother is Ling Yi, which leads me to believe that he's of half Asian, half white American, half Asian American. And I get that sense that Asian American, how do you say this without being controversial? They're disciplined. They don't have time for BS. They do good in school. They're all engineers. They're all doctors. They're all lawyers. They put a big premium on education and hard work. And I think the best example I can think of is he ran for president, the Indian American Vivek Ramaswamy, I believe is his name. Vivek Ramaswamy. He comes from the same sort of first generation, second generation Asian, Indian American, Chinese American sort of milieu. He made a controversial statement when he said, if Americans, what did he say? I'm paraphrasing. He said, if Americans celebrated, rather than celebrating, the cheerleading, the leader of the cheerleading squad or the prom queen, instead of pedestalizing her, why don't they celebrate and pedestalize the winner of the spelling bee, or the girl who wins first prize at the science fair? And that it created a bit of backlash. There was a bit of people were not very happy with that. So you see the same thing, and this very successful. It seems he's invested in all these companies. He's probably very wealthy, and used his leisure time to write this book. A bright guy, and I was impressed by his facts. He's a venture capitalist guy, but his grasp of history and his argumentation style and his knowledge of American history and even broader world history was quite impressive. So make of that what you will. The other book I read for America, my 250th anniversary reading plan, is this book. This is a textbook from my university days that I still have. I want to get rid of it, so I said I'll read this and get rid of it. This is called The History of Our Time. Sorry about the glare. The subtitle is Readings on Post-War America, and it is mostly primary documents of post-war America. So you have the speech, you have Kennedy's the speech to I can't repeat it. Not what you can do for your country, what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. What was that speech? It was the John F. Kennedy's address to the nation. Or sorry, not that speech. It's the Cuban Missile Crisis. President Kennedy addresses the nation. You have Dwight D. Eisenhower's farewell address. This goes through all kinds of things in post-war America. So there's about the affluent, the youth movement in the 1960s, the civil rights and racial justice movement also in the 1950s and 60s, struggle over gender and sexual liberation, the Vietnam War, confrontations and new limits. That's the 1970s, Watergate, and that leads to the next part, which is the new era of conservatism, the rise of people like the new right, Ronald Reagan, etc. And it's mostly primary documents, but there's a lot of commentary involved. So this is mostly for university students, but I read it. It was good to get an idea of post-war America, because we can, with 25 years hindsight in the 21st century, we're starting to crystallize the 20th century, the 20th century American history. We can start to see what it looked like, because it's slowly receding to the past. It's becoming history. We had really from the 1930s, after the Great Depression, although before also there was a progressive movement, then there was the New Deal, and the New Deal the politics of the New Deal really stayed until really the 1970s. So you had America was almost a corporatist system. That you had big government, not big government. You had big business, you had government, and you had the labor unions all working, really working together to keep taxes high, keep wages high, keep jobs. Uh, they kind of work together, and you include with that in America in this period there were mainline denominations. Americans really belonged to about three or four churches, generally speaking, and they were very mainline. They were very leftist churches. Like they were very much, these churches were very much left wing. And then the third thing was immigration. America was, of course, it was the black minority, but they were kept really until the 1960s without even civil rights. But this, there was very little immigration between the 1920s to the 1960s. So America was very homogeneous. And then in 1965, in the 70s, 80s, immigrants from other parts of the world, Latin Americans, people from all over the world started to come. That started to change America. And the churches, those left-wing churches, they became, they were discredited. And then you had the rise of the fundamental evangelical churches where anybody could open a mega church really from anywhere. And that changed. And then, of course, the coming of Reagan and the new right and the deregulation of government and business and the slashing of taxes to a large extent. So that was my American reading. The next my America 250th anniversary reading project, which is gonna it looks like it's gonna run all year. We'll see. We'll see if I'm still alive by the end of the year. If this war doesn't go into catastrophe, basically. The next reading project that I've been participating this year is Historathon. The end of March marks the end of quarter one of Historathon. Historathon is a reading project in which you are encouraged to read books about history, and the year is divided into 4 quarters. And each quarter is a defined historical period. So quarter one was the beginning of time, really, up until the year 500 AD or CE. And that's what I read, what a lot of booktubers have read in the first quarter of 2026. The second quarter will be 500 CE to 1500 CE. But I'll talk about that in my what I plan to read for quarter two and for April and for quarter two. But for quarter one, again, beginning of time to 500 CE. For that, I've been focusing on the Punic, on the Carthaginians, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, what became the Carthaginians, and I've just continued reading that. I read 2 books this month about it. The first one is by Ernest Bradford. It's called Hannibal, and this was a good biography of this military genius who has a very tragic ending because he ultimately is on the losing side. The other book I read about for Historathon 2026 Q1 is The Punic Wars by Nigel Bagnall. The subtitle of this is Rome, Carthage, and the Struggle for the Mediterranean. This is very much, I thought this was an older book. It's published in 1990, so it is older, but this one's even older. This one was published in 1981 originally. So these are older books about the Punic Wars, and a big part of the Punic Wars, especially the Second Punic Wars, is Hannibal. So this one is very much a military history. Very much a military history. Nigel Bagnall, Sir Nigel Bagnall, was born in India in 1927, so very much a British, the last of the British imperialists. He joined the British Army in 1945 and served in Palestine, Malaya, Borneo, the Canal Zone, Cyprus, Singapore, and Germany. He ended his distinguished military career as Chief of General Staff in London and went on to become an honorary fellow of Balliol College, Oxford. He died in 2000. So a military man, and you can tell from the writing. Um, Bradford, I don't know if he's a military person. His writing's not bad, but his military writing is not as good as somebody who was in the military. These military guys, they're able to, because I think they've seen they've seen battles, so they're able to describe military tactics. And for a non-military person who struggles, I struggle reading military histories because I don't have first-hand experience. But they do it. I feel he does it much better. So good if you like strategy and tactics and operational and lessons learned from war and battle. The other thing I'll say about Hannibal and the Punic Wars, and every book I've read about the Carthaginians and Hannibal and the Punic Wars, all of the authors, they all sympathize with the with Carthage. Rome always comes out as this brute, just forceful, brutish sort of power, while the Carthaginians are always looked at. There's a lot of sympathy for the Carthaginians, maybe because of the tragic ending, but also because the Carthaginians, they weren't really aggressive war power. They were very much a mercantile power. So anyway, what I was trying to say is that any author who writes I don't know how many I read, maybe 8 books about the Carthaginians in the first quarter for Historathon 2026, all of them, there's always sympathy for the Carthaginians. So that's Historathon done. There were a few other reading projects which I just from watching BookTube, I started to pick up reading that interested me, so I added it to my reading. It wasn't planned, but I ended up reading on these subjects. The first one is a new event that came up called March on the Rails. This was started by Alan. I believe his channel is called Alan Reads. Either case, I'll link his channel below. You should check it out. It was a very interesting reading event that he launched. I took a big broader view of the March on the Rails. Basically, as Alan describes on his channel, March on the Rails is where you read books that glorify, or not glorify, but includes rails, trains, railways in the story or in the title, or basically trains have to be in the in the book. I took a bit more of an expansive view. I could have read some kind of history of railroads, or maybe a crime novel that involved railroads. The first thing a lot of people come to their mind is Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. I took a bit more of a expansive view, so I read this by Irvin Welsh. It's called Trainspotting. This, well, actually, before I discuss Trainspotting, because or actually, let me. I explain. I might as well. I'm trying to fit this all. I read this basically to get away. I'm in the middle of a war zone. I needed an escape, so I wanted to read something that's just gets me away from. Because I read mostly nonfiction, and you can see I read mostly nonfiction, mostly history. But with what's going on, sometimes you need a release. So I wanted to read something that just lets me escape to a world I knew very little about, and this book definitely did it. It's this is basically, it has very little to do with trains. This is basically the story. I think it would be set in the late 1970s, early 1980s Britain, and specifically Scotland. And it follows. It's not a linear story. It's not a narrative with a beginning, a middle, and the end. I think Irvin Welsh. I think he initially wrote this on magazines as separate sort of not articles, but separate stories, just short stories, and then he combined it into this book. And it follows pretty much these 4 characters: Renton, Spud, Sigboy, and Begbie. And they are again, late 1970s, 1980s, working class Britain, and the challenges that they face. The biggest, this book is basically about heroin and drug addiction and working class despondency in Britain of the late 70s, early 80s. It's written in the Scottish vernacular, so there's a lot of. If you want to know what this sounds like, check out Austin. Austin at Eternal Reading. This is Austin at Eternal Reading's biography. No, I'm kidding. Austin is a good guy. He's not a hero. He's not a. These are the dregs of society. Austin is a very very good guy, a very well read guy. I'll link to his channel. Actually, you should check him out. And Austin is not Scottish. Austin is Northern Irish, but his accent is, I think, very Northern Irish, Scottish, same difference really. But no, this is that story, and it's again written in the Scottish vernacular. It takes you time to get accustomed to it, but by the time you start reading, you start to, I think now, I've been practicing my Scottish accent in front of the mirror since I've been reading this book. But although I wanted this as an escape, it's a really tragic story, because all drug addiction eventually leads to tragedy, because it's a very, very deep, very sad subject. But again, you can say this isn't the greatest, literary achievement that's ever been written. You can say it's very laddish, it's very dude bro, it's very, very masculine. I mean, there are very few female characters, but all the female characters here they're just sex objects. That's all they are, sex objects. Nothing more, nothing less. If there can be anything less. So, in that sense, I don't know. That's the biggest criticism I had of this. And at the end of the book, Irvin Welsh starts to add a bit of female characters. And he puts, because women are just as prone to addiction as men. It doesn't discriminate based on gender. But I think what the publisher said was, look, there's too much masculinity, and all the female characters are just sex objects. You really need to add a female character. You really need to. So at the end, he does add a little bit, and I had wished he fleshed it out a bit more. I wish he did, because you get the female perspective, but again, it's just very little bit, and it's at the end. But had he expanded on it, I think it would have been an even better book. Which is to say that this wasn't bad. I was very impressed by how Irvin Welsh got into the mind of a heroin addict, how he was able to explain the thoughts of a heroin addict or of a drug addict. I mean, I read his Wikipedia just before I made this video, just to get a background about him. So yeah, he is a Scottish author, so he was raised in this culture, I guess. It says that in the 1970s he was in London, and he was part of the punk scene, and he got into trouble and he went to jail, and then he reformed himself and he started writing. But the way he gets into the mind of a drug addict, the way, there's a whole scene about, because HIV, sharing needles and having a lot of unprotected sex. HIV is a big part of this book. The way he's able to describe, there's a scene where they're in an HIV, sort of like a counseling session. The way he's able to penetrate that, really, really well done. I was impressed by that. So, again, you want to read it or not? I don't know. This is a bit of a cult classic. The movie, this was released as a movie in 1996, I think, starring what's the famous Scottish actor? I forget his name. Mathew McConaughey, I want to say. Anyway, the movie you can check out too if you don't want to read the book. But if you're into this kind of thing, one more thing I wanted to say, what I liked about this. I wanted to say about this is, what did I want to say? There was one last thing I wanted to say. I completely had a brain A brain fog. What was the last thing I wanted to say? Uh, okay, now this is getting. What did I? There was. Okay. It's about. This deals with. So I read mostly nonfiction. I read mostly history. And also, if I do read fiction and I read British fiction, it's usually written by the upper classes, for the upper classes, by the upper classes, about the upper classes. This book really it's a I mean, if you read Victorian literature, of course there's Charles Dickens, and I'm sure others have written about working class Britain, fictionalized it. I think there was another book also set in Scotland about a similar Shuggie Bain, which I own a copy. I haven't read yet, but so I'm sure it exists. I'm sure in Britain there's a big literature scene about working class life in the 20th century, in the 70s, the 80s, this sort of early Thatcherite, pre-Blairite era. But again, I read mostly fiction, mostly I read mostly nonfiction, mostly history. When I read, you see a lot of the authors, if they're British authors, they're from Cambridge or Oxford. They're very upper class. This is, it took me to a place, that working class Britain, that I knew very little about. Very little about. Another side of Britain that isn't, I don't know, at least historically maybe not very well represented, but I'm sure there's many other books, probably better than this one, that describes sort of English working class life. So that was also interesting to see. So something a bit different. There's two more books I want to discuss quickly, because I don't want this video to go on and on. There was another booktube event that's part of Vince at Traumatic Tomes, I think is the name of his channel. I'll link him as well, Traumatic Tomes. He has a book club where he discusses traumatic reads. I think his channel is either Traumatic Tomes or Traumatic Reads, and his book club is called the Traumatic Book Club. And for that, he read All Quiet on the Western Front, and I had the copy, so I said I'll read it. And it's a very short book, not very long. It's by Eric Maria Remarque, very famous. Recently been made into a Netflix movie. I made a video about this, discussing this. This is about boys who were recruited pretty much from high school into the German army in World War I, and then their introduction to manhood is war, and how that just the killing fields of World War I, the trenches, written in gruesome detail here in this book. Again, a very sad, very tragic book, but if you want to, I think I spoke more about it in my previous video. If I remember, I'll link to it. You can check it out. A short book, but a very powerful one. Another book I picked up, this was a random, I picked it up, I found it at the bookstore, and I just couldn't resist, so I read it. This is called The Rise and Fall of Arab Presidents for Life. Again, sorry for the glare. I need to fix my filming. The author of this is Roger Owen. And he discusses, you can see Gaddafi there, that's Bashar al-Assad there. These are the Arab presidents who are ostensibly presidents of republics, but who have been ruling like monarchs. And this book, he released it just as the Arab Spring sprung up in 2000. When was this published? 2012. So he was researching, and then the Arab Spring happens. Because here, it's a very academic look at, he takes an academic view of these Arab presidents for life. So people like Mubarak in Egypt, Gaddafi in Libya, the Assad regime in Syria. He discusses Egypt, Tunisia, Syria, Algeria, Libya, Sudan, Yemen, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, the monarchies in Jordan, Morocco, Bahrain, and Oman. But he focuses on the republics, and what he was trying to take an academic view and to see what these leaders were going to do about succession, because they had been leaders for 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, 35 years, long strongmen who were in control of the Middle East and republics. So would they pass it on to their son, which happened in Syria? Would they give it to somebody? How is succession going to happen? What does that mean? Of course, most of it was answered by the Arab Spring, because most of the leaders themselves didn't know. They had no plans for succession, because succession, there was, you build a power base around you, but if you succeeded to, you give power to your son or to whoever, the power dynamics shift. So again, academic, a bit very in the weeds, Middle Eastern. But I enjoyed reading this. I read it very quick. It's not very long, but it's some fascinating insights, and it's relevant. It's relevant. Before you wanted to call Egypt, there was a strong man in Egypt. You wanted to call Libya, there was a strong man in Libya. You wanted to get in touch with Syria, there was a strong man. You wanted to they had strong men. You knew who to call. There was a direct line. With the Arab Spring, it's much more fuzzier. There's competing powers. There's been great changes in the Middle East since the fall of these Arab regimes. The second thing that this is pertinent is because we're seeing the rise. This isn't just in the Arab states. These presidents for life. We're seeing that all over the world. Putin in Russia has been in power since 1999. Erdogan in Turkey, he's been around since 2003. You've got Xi Jinping in China has been around for quite a while now. Who else? There's quite a few. Netanyahu in Israel has been around since 1996. The guy in Hungary, the guy in Belarus, the guy in Orban has been around for a while. There's Belarus, the last dictator in Europe, Lukashenko, I believe is his name. All these presidents for life. There are constitutions and there are parliaments, but they keep amending constitutions to keep themselves in power, to give themselves another mandate and another mandate. So this isn't just the Arab world now. It's becoming a global phenomenon, and who knows where else that might happen. I mean, people, who knows? So we'll keep it at who knows. That's about it. There was one more event, and I should wrap this video up. It's been 10 days, so this is going to go a bit long, and I had the long intro. You guys want the update, the war update from the heart of the war zone, so I take about 10 minutes early in the video to talk about that. That's why I think these videos are going long. There was one fail this month, and that was my other reading project, which is Russian Lit 2026, my plan to read Russian literature in the year 2026. Because March was March of the Mammoth, I had decided to read this book, Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. Look at this. It's like an American football. Big thing. I got into this. I read chapter 1. I read chapter 2. But I couldn't because of the situation. Again, the situation just didn't allow me to just delve into this book. I want to give it maximum attention, I guess. And especially in the beginning of the month, like I said, a lot of friends, a lot of people who are alone here, a lot of people here in the United Arab Emirates, they live alone. They've left their family, they've come here, they're alone. So I've been doing a lot of comforting, a lot of meeting people to reassure them that everything is going to be okay. So I just couldn't get into this. I just couldn't. It's so long. And I mean, March of the Mammoth says you have to start a book that's 800 plus pages. It doesn't say you have to finish it in March. It could take you 6 months to finish if you want, but you just have to start it in March. So that's my excuse. But I couldn't. I read all of it, but I couldn't do this. Whether I'll read it in April and continue, I read chapter 1, chapter 2. Again, nothing wrong with the story. It was an excellent start, and I was getting into it. But again, nothing to do with the book or the bad writing. For the reasons why I DNF'd it, it's just the situation. Whether I'll read it in April, I don't know. I'm not sure. We'll see. we'll see. I need you really. What you don't want to do, I think, with this book is read it and then stop and then read it, because I heard there's a lot of characters, and if you read the first 10 chapters and then you take a week break and come back, you need to be consistent with it. And I just this month of war, this spring of war, that looks like it's gonna go into the summer, just didn't allow me to do that. So, and I just wanted to say I had this other version of it. So I have two Tolstoy's War and Peace. One is the Wordsworth Classics, and one is the Penguin Popular. And I thought they were different translations. Turns out it's the same translator. So I've got two copies. One I get. I think I might read this one. This one is a better. It's bigger and it's easier. Although the font is small, it's easier. It's easier on the hands. I don't know. But whether I read it in April or not, I'm still thinking about it. I definitely will let you know what I decide to read for April. I've got a TBR video which I'll record, which I'll discuss what I plan to read in April. So until then, BookTube, I will wrap this up. I'd like to thank you once again, all of you, for all the comments, all the emails of support. Again, I'm okay. I just took a bit of a break. Not that long. I mean, in any normal situation, 10 days without a video is normal. But on BookTube, it's got to be every day or every other day. But hopefully, I'll try to be a bit more consistent in April, make more videos. But until then, BookTube, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you very much. Salute.